A lot of people have called schizoaffective disorder diet schizophrenia, or otherwise implied that it is less severe than schizophrenia. But did you know that that's not the case? Hi, I'm Sareth. I'm diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder and PTSD, and today we're going to be comparing schizoaffective disorder with schizophrenia. Schizophrenia is defined as a chronic mental illness that affects the way a person thinks, perceives reality, and interacts with others. Schizoaffective disorder is defined as a chronic mental illness that is a combination of schizophrenia and a mood disorder. Schizophrenia affects about 1% of the population. Its symptoms are usually continuous, lasting 6 months or more. It is usually diagnosed in late adolescence, early adulthood, but it can happen when you're older or even when you're younger. Schizoaffective disorder is slightly rarer, affecting only 0.3% of the population. The duration of its psychotic symptoms are usually shorter than that of schizophrenia, cycling between those and the mood disorder symptoms. However, the psychotic symptoms can last as long as those in schizophrenia. It's usually diagnosed later in life, but also can happen at any age. Treatment and causes of both disorders are pretty much the same, treatment being a mix of medications and therapy. While causes aren't completely known, they're theorized to be a combination of brain chemistry, environmental factors, and genetic factors. So here's the big question: which is worse? I've done a lot of research into this, and mostly what I found is that it's largely a matter of perspective. Since schizoaffective is two disorders in one, people argue that that makes it worse. People also argue that the presence of mood symptoms in schizoaffective disorders makes the whole ordeal more emotionally trying than a person who has schizophrenia, since they do not have the mood symptoms. As well, mood symptoms and psychotic symptoms in schizoaffective can happen at the same time, which of course makes it a more intense ordeal. But then you have the counter argument. Generally speaking, mood disorders are easier to treat than psychotic disorders such as schizophrenia. This means that schizoaffective disorder has a better prognosis, a better long-term outlook than schizophrenia. The argument is that because of that prognosis, because of the ability to more efficiently treat part of schizoaffective, the mood part, that it is less severe than schizophrenia, because in schizophrenia, there is no part of it that is easier to treat. However, schizoaffective disorder is not perfectly halved. It's not perfectly 50% schizophrenia and perfectly 50% mood disorder. A person may experience more psychotic symptoms than they do mood symptoms, or vice versa. And as I said, in schizoaffective disorder, it is also possible that you experience both of those symptoms at the same time. Now, speaking on just the psychotic symptoms that both disorders share and completely ignoring the mood component of schizoaffective, is one more severe than the other? And no, not necessarily. It's important to remember that in mental illnesses like this, the severity of symptoms varies based upon the individual. For example, two people with schizophrenia may have completely different outlooks. One might need to be hospitalized for their whole life because they cannot otherwise function. The other person might hold down a steady job, have good relationships with their families, and etc. Likewise, comparing a schizophrenic individual to a schizoaffective individual is the same story. Depending on who you're comparing, the schizophrenic individual may or may not have worse psychotic symptoms than the schizoaffective individual. Let's jump back to what I mentioned about how the psychotic symptoms in schizoaffective tend to be a shorter duration than those in schizophrenia. Once again, this is just a tendency, because psychosis in schizoaffective can last as long as it does in schizophrenia. But if you want to go and look at the probability, the average overall, the average being that the psychosis in schizophrenia does last longer than that in schizoaffective. You could look at that and say, well, judging overall on the probability or the average of how long they're going to experience psychosis, schizophrenia is worse because it's a longer period. However, that is negating the fact of the severity of the psychosis endured. For example, take a schizophrenic person who has the 6-month average duration of psychosis. During this, his psychosis symptoms are hearing voices. And then you take a schizoaffective individual who, let's give him 3 months of psychosis. During this, he experiences the voices, paranoia, delusions, and even visual hallucinations. Now, he's experiencing all this for a shorter period than that schizophrenic person, but what the schizophrenic person experiences is less severe than the schizoaffective. So going back to that overall general picture of the average of the probability, psychosis in schizophrenia and schizoaffective are the same severity overall, but the duration of symptoms is shorter in schizoaffective than it is in schizophrenia. But again, that overall view does not take into account the severity of symptoms based on the individual. It does not take into account the fact that a schizoaffective person can have symptoms as long as a schizophrenic person, and they can also experience both mood and psychosis symptoms at the same time, unlike a schizophrenic person who will only ever experience the psychosis. Another question I see come along with this is, if a schizoaffective person does have a shorter window of psychosis, is it more likely that they are going to recognize that something's wrong with them? And the answer is yes, but not for that reason. Because by definition, schizophrenia or psychosis is a break with reality, perceiving reality incorrectly. Neither a schizophrenic person or a schizoaffective person is more likely to seek help or to understand that they have a problem. Or since schizoaffective patients do have that mood component, it is more likely that they will seek help. But for the mood part, a schizophrenic person not having the mood component isn't going to realize that they have a mood problem because it's not there to realize. However, a schizoaffective person can potentially recognize that they have that mood problem and seek help, which might lead to a diagnosis of schizoaffective. Now, just because they're told they have schizoaffective doesn't mean they're going to be any more likely to believe it or to accept treatment for that. So just to sum up, there is no clear answer on whether one disorder is worse than the other. It all comes down to a case-by-case basis and one's own personal perspective. Schizoaffective does have a better prognosis long-term because part of their problems can be treated more efficiently. However, treating those symptoms may help them to get better, but it will never cure the psychosis part. So even if you completely get rid of their mood problems, the schizophrenia will always remain, just like a person with schizophrenia will also always have that issue. So what do you guys think? Do you think one is worse than the other? did I miss some information that you read that maybe I didn't cover in this video? Please feel free to share all that below. Ask any questions you want, suggest a video topic, like and subscribe while you're down there, and I will see y'all in another video. Bye.